Okay, well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today at this event at Immersia, but we'll talk to you a little bit about the Korean Literature Translation Workshop. Before beginning, I'd just like to take a second to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Nanawal and Nambri people. This is a bit, as you see, it's a bit of a intercontinental project, but a lot of the work for this project was also done on these lands. And of course, Indigenous people have a very long history tradition of storytelling that I think we all learn from. So I'd like to take a second to acknowledge the traditional custodians and also pay my respects to any elders past, present, and emerging. And so to talk to you a little bit about the Korean Literature Translation Workshop, it's a bit of it's been running annually since 2023, so this year is actually the third time that we did the workshop, and I'll tell you a bit about the workshop in a bit, but just to let you know that it has been supported by the Literature Translation Institute of Korea and the ANU Korea Institute, and it also has involvement from people from the University of Melbourne, and also this year from the National University of Singapore, so lots of different people have been involved in it, and I think that's only made it richer. But to tell you what the workshop is, so we call it a workshop, but essentially it involves like a course worth length of teaching and learning. And I guess the main idea behind the workshop is to learn translation, specifically literary translation, through hands-on experience actually translating a book. So what we do each year is that we pick a single book and it's divided up usually into different sections, and those sections are given to groups of participants, and the participants kind of translate those bits. So you're actually translating a book through the workshop. And sometimes before the workshop starts, we've been doing this last year and this year as well, we'll have a book club where we can talk about the book as well, just to kind of confirm that we understand it, or to discuss aspects of the text, like, is there a particular writing style? Are there specific themes in the book? What about the characters? Like a really deep understanding of the book is kind of necessary to be able to translate it. So it's good to have those discussions before we start the workshop. And then once the workshop actually starts, we have weekly seminars. And so I called it like a course worth length. It is pretty much, it's like 12 weeks of having weekly seminars where we discuss translation theories, techniques, maybe certain bits of the translation that are difficult to approach and how to resolve that. Creative writing skills, which are a huge part because this is literary translation. We're translating a book, we're translating literature, not like, like a legal document or something. So the translation also has to involve good creative writing skills. And Adam, whose video we'll show you later, talks a little bit more about certain specific things we talk about during these seminars. And then as part of the workshop, we have really regular detailed feedback as well. So, there'll be like a shared document where everybody's putting their translations, and the instructions of the workshop, like me and other people like Adam, are going through it and providing comments. And during seminars, we'll also discuss, this line could be done this way. This word is really tricky. What do we think? So there's a lot of kind of feedback involved throughout. And of course, this is just like a general summary of what we do. The discussion should hopefully give you a bit more of an idea of how the workshop actually works, and you are very welcome to ask questions about that as well. And as part of the workshop, so through the workshop, we've had some really exciting things happen. The first time we ran the workshop in 2023, the book we translated actually got picked up by a publisher, HarperCollins, and it was published. And so if any of you were, maybe you were there at like the event we did last year where we talked about this. But anyways, the book is in stores. So you can walk into a Dimex right now and buy it, and which is very cool. And it has, everybody's names in it, it's very exciting. When you
also a series on Netflix.
It is also a series on Netflix, that's right, starring Kong Yu, if you are familiar with Kong Yu. It's a very well-known actor. And so we've had exciting output like that. We also host very cool events like this one. But last year, for example, the author of the book we were working on last year came to Australia, came to Canberra, and we were able to have an event for that. And stuff like this is really exciting because a lot of the times, even when you look at like established, published literary translators, sometimes they have very little to no communication with the author. So for people who are translating the book, for participants of this workshop to be able to meet the author and be able to talk to them and discuss their questions or talk about their translation is really exciting. So we were able to do that last year. This year, just Monday actually, which was the end of this year's workshop, we had one of the really well-known translators, Paige Morris, give us a talk about creative writing for literary translation, which was also it's really helpful. She gave us some very useful advice about translation techniques and also like translation as a career path. And then we also have, of course, events coming up in case you're available later this week. So the author of the book that we are working on this year, the author is called Kim Gumi. She is in Canberra, I think. She's already arrived. And she will be part of, I think, 2 or 3 events, but this is one of them that will happen next week where we talk to her about her works. And at this point, I would also be remiss not to tell you about the Korean Literature Festival, which this event is a part of, which there's a poster up there if you want to scan the QR code later. But a lot of interesting events happening as part of that. So I will now show you a video by Adam. So Adam is another instructor for the workshop. He is based in Melbourne, so he couldn't be here today, but he's prepared a kind of presentation for us to talk us through some of the things that come up when we're doing this workshop, some of the techniques that we discuss. And so, yeah, that should be interesting.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Aditi. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to Immersia and to our talk. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I worked from the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations throughout my time on the project here in Melbourne. And I would like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and future, and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. So my presentation today is titled From Theory to Practice, the Australian National University and National University of Singapore Literary Translation Institute of Korea Workshop 2025. So little 자기소개 or 자기소개 here, and this already shows you some of the issues that we face when translating from Korean. 자기소개 is self-introduction, and if we choose to keep a word such as this in English when translating, we have to sometimes transcribe it. And transcribing from Korean into English, so romanization can be very, very complicated. There can be many different ways to romanize a word. And which do you go with? This is just the beginning of it all with the self-introduction here. So I'm currently a lecturer in Korean Studies here at the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne, formerly in Korean Studies, but I also teach across Korean, Japanese, and Asian Studies. I did my PhD in Translation Studies at Monash, and I published my monograph here in 2022. If you're interested in historical and or political texts and non-literary translation, non-fiction translation, please check this work out. I coordinated a large translation project in 2020 at Monash with 14 wonderful participants, and we published this as a annotated kind of work, looking at 33 interviews with some of the most prominent North Korean defectors living in South Korea. So that's the title there as well. If you're interested, please check it out. And I've been invited to these Literary Translation Institute of Korea projects, organized and secured by my colleague, Dr. Yong Jae-pek at ANU for the past 3 years. I've been very fortunate to be part of them. So my role during the 2025 project, weekly introduction to relevant translation theory and discussions as well. So we, for the first half of the workshops, looked at different theories in translation studies. And then the second half, we really looked at the drafts and key translation issues, some of which I'll be talking about today. Now, the two key theories in translation studies, at least when I introduced translation theory, scopus theory, in other words, what is the purpose of the translation? And this really frames the whole translation project and the approach that we should take when we translate. In other words, is this text to inform someone? Is it a manual, or is it to entertain? If it's to entertain, which is usually the case with literary translation, you have to formulate the translation approach in such a way so that the target text is going to be interesting for the readers, the target culture readers. In other words, it will have a similar effect to that of the source text. The second concept is foreignization versus domestication, which have been formally seen as part of a dichotomy. In other words, if we have a word like kimchi, which is a Korean word, of course, when you translate this into English, because it's a well-known word, of course, these days we'll often see it just romanized into kimchi. We know what kimchi is. But in the case of words that are not as common, we might either see them, again, romanized or domesticated into something that's more familiar to target readers, such as sauerkraut, maybe, or even in tradaptation or adaptation through translation, something like Vegemite. Now, with these two broad approaches, then we looked at specific issues within translation. So actual microanalysis, and this included things like dealing with syntax and tense. Korean is a subject, object, verb language, and it has a fluid tense. So when we have a narrative or even dialogue, speakers can switch between different tenses, and it's not jarring. But if we do the same in English, if we don't maintain a past tense, there can be confusion. And then, of course, translating things like character, voice, metaphor, mimesis, and onomatopoeia, all those sound words like clack, clack, or tack, tack, which are not as common in English as they are in Korean. So I would like to just say a very quick thank you to Dr. Yeonjepek once again for having me on this project over the years, to Aditi Dubey, who started first as a translator in 2023, then very quickly moved into being a key editorial figure within the project. And then this year, co-facilitating and really helping, being a huge, amazing addition to the project by preparing weekly feedback from student participant drafts for me to look at and prepare the lectures from. Dr. Ji Soan from NUS for bringing over all of the participants from National University of Singapore. And of course, last but not least, the 15 amazing dedicated students. I do not like to refer to participants as students because I think we are all in the same boat as translators, really. We all bring something different. And here they are. We have Injee, Sunny, Grace, Alexander, Yerin, Kaya, Destiny, Cassidy, Praju, Huiying, Demi, Astrid, Ida, Megan, and Vanessa. Thank you so much for putting up with my dad jokes for the past few weeks. So this is what our nights looked like. This is the glamorous life of translators here. You can see very exciting. Reminded us of the days of the pandemic. So some key examples of the challenges we face when we translate. Well, first of all, common misconception is if you speak two languages, you'll make a great translator. That is not always the case. Just knowing the two languages is not enough. You need a lot of practice and/or talent. Sometimes the text you are working with might not be great. That itself may pose challenges. And so very often in literary translation, what we see is a translation that is better than the original. And well, I guess that's what we can aim for always, isn't it? So the first example of the thing that we dealt with, let's have a go. Everyone, if you sing along with me, tea boba syntax, chicken fried syntax, Hollywood and the Party Hills syntax. Everything is syntax. Okay, this is one of my dad jokes here. Of course, this is in reference to Cat's Eyes Gnarly, where the actual lyrics of the song are boba tea, gnarly, fried chicken, gnarly, party in the Hollywood Hills, gnarly. Everything is gnarly. I joked here, of course. If you're a fan of K-pop, you'll know this, I'm sure. If you don't, please watch this video. Look up Cat's Eye Gnarly on YouTube. I turned this upside down and I said, everything is syntax. Yeah, everything's not gnarly. Everything is syntax. So this is how I sort of presented the topic of syntax during the lecture, the seminar in week 2. I mentioned that Korean, of course, is an agglutinative language, subject, object, verb, very different from English. Traditionally, only the terminal or final verb in the sentence then dictates what the whole sentence is, the tense of the whole sentence. So 오늘 밥을 먹고 영화를 보고 잤어요. Yeah. If we look at the sentence, it says I, rice or dinner or food, eat, movie, watch, and then the last verb is slept, went to sleep. So that final verb, which is past tense, dictates the tense of the whole sentence. The verbs within the sentence do not have to be past tense. They do not have to be uniform. You would not have past tense verbs within the sentence in Korean. So it's very, very important not to translate literally the tense and the structure when going into English from Korean. I specifically asked participants to watch out for relative clauses, things like which, who, whom, who's, that. Very, very common to throw these into English when translating from Korean. The man that got off the train wore a hat which was yellow that he bought at, that sort of sentence. Conditional endings, if or when. Connectors, because, therefore, and so on. And all of the above in run-on sentences. You can end up with huge sentences with all of these in them. So I used color coding to help explain what's happening and the fact that you just have to flip these elements. So when writing in English, because it's easy to forget, even I sometimes write in Korean syntax. Yeah, that is one of these, a perfect example of a sentence where the syntax is messed up. So you just have to flip the part so that the blue is now at the beginning and yellow at the end. Even I sometimes end up using Korean syntax when writing in English. It becomes much more readable. Of course, we do not want to end up sounding like Yoda, right? Yoda is said to sound very similar to a Korean speaker or Japanese speaker in terms of his use of syntax. So here's an example just to summarize, to show you what we started with and then what we ended up with. So here's a second draft. This is already a very good piece of work. When I first arrived at the Gotek-style house, the first thing that caught my eye was the flashy detached house. On the veranda, a young girl was intently looking down below. She was the professor's oldest daughter, Kang-son. Then Gyo-sung arrived, and we had dinner after unpacking our luggage in the inner building. Now, here's a long sentence coming up. I had to share a room with Kang-son, but because she was currently preparing to study abroad, she usually stayed in a detached house that had a study. The professor said I could just think of it as using the room by myself. That's a very long run-on sentence. There's a lot happening there. Very, very confusing. So, and we have relative clauses as well. Attached house that had a study. So here's what we ended up with in the third week after working through it. When I first arrived at the Gotek, the old traditional house, so here we have a very nice calc translation telling us that what a Gotek is. The first thing that caught my eye was the splendid sarangche. We've retained the name of that room in Korean here, the Korean word. And again, we've then explained what that is, or men's quarters and reception hall. On its raised wooden veranda, again describing the veranda, a young girl was leaning forward, gazing intently at the ground beneath. She was the professor's eldest daughter, Kang-son. Soon after, Kyo-sung arrived, and once we had unpacked our things in the ante, again, that's another thing from the source text, another room, the inner quarters, we sat down to dinner. Now look at this long sentence, it's been corrected here. I was supposed to share a room with Kang-son, but since she was preparing to study abroad, she usually stayed in the sarangche where the study was. End of the sentence. Just think of it as having the room to yourself, the professor said. Now we have a quotation. We have a quotation that is not there in the original. So what happens often in Korean is you'll have quotations that are basically worked into or paraphrased into the text. Very common to do in Korean, but you would not do in English. It becomes too much of a mouthful and just confusing. Who's saying what? We don't know who's saying what. And so here we've rendered it into an actual quotation. So that's just a little preview of the sort of work that goes into translation. Again, I cannot comment or, say enough good things about the participants for this workshop. They worked very, very hard. So congratulations on your hard work. And I hope that some of you here today will also consider joining these projects in the future, or that maybe we've inspired you to translate a little bit. So thank you so much, everyone. And I'll pass back to Aditi. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear. Okay, but to begin with, I guess I'll just ask you all to do some introductions, just a short little introduction to tell everybody who you are. I can start. I don't know if I did it at the beginning, but hi, I'm Aditi. I'm a PhD student here at the ANU in linguistics, but I'm also an affiliate of the Korea Institute, and I'm one of the instructors of the literature translation workshop that we just told you about. And so I'll mainly be doing the asking of questions, but I'm also here in case anybody has any questions for me. Yeah.
I don't want to touch the mic, but I don't know where it is. Hi, I'm Destiny. I've kind of put I had a vague introduction up there, but I'm an ANU alum. I study linguistics and humanities and a minor in advanced Korean, and I graduated, I think, I did 2 graduations, but I graduated 2 or 3 years ago. I work in the APS now, not using any Korean or linguistics, but I'm also a second-year participant of the workshop, and it has been a very good experience, so keen to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm in my last year of my undergrad at ANU, where I'm studying linguistics and Korean language. And this is my first year doing the translation workshop, but I really enjoyed it, so I'll probably do it again.
And hi everyone, I'm Praju. I'm an honors student in linguistics at ANU at the moment. Also my first time doing the translation workshop, but I really enjoyed it, so it's been great.
And Injee, who's joining us from Sydney. Would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Okay, hi, I'm Injee, and I've just finished my studies in the University of Sydney, and I majored in psychology and Korean studies. So while I was doing Korean studies, I got an email about the first workshop that I did, which was in 2023, and since then I kept participating in the workshops, so I think this is my 3rd translation workshop that I've been doing.
Yes. Okay. So we have a mixed bag, I guess, in terms of people who've been there for all of the workshops and people who are only there this year. But I guess a common question to everybody is what motivated you to join the workshop? Why were you interested in doing the translation workshop? Do you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. Right here. I didn't join the first year because I was still in my last, I think I was finishing up my final year uni, but I joined afterwards because after you finish doing classes, it's harder to kind of find times to keep up your Korean practice, and also I've tried translating, poetry in my own time, and it's been really, really hard, and I have so many books in Korean that I have not touched over 2.5 years, so really I just needed something to sort of kind of push me to do things regularly, and having some kind of class or workshop structure like this is really helpful, and also the group format is really nice to learn from other people, so it's been very rewarding.
What about you?
I first sort of got interested in translating and interpreting when I did an introduction to interpreting course when I was on exchange in Korea, and so when I came back from that, my teacher was asking us what do you want to do after uni, and I was like, oh, I really like translating and interpreting. She's like, you have to go to this workshop, but last year it was too late to join because it had already started, so I joined this year. Yeah.
I've always sort of been interested in learning more about translation, but I didn't really have any chance to formally study it while I was doing my undergrad. And then I found out about this workshop. I think I saw an Instagram post about it or something. But yeah, and I ended up being really interested in signing up. Yeah, that's how.
Well, I'm glad that the marketing is working, apparently. I don't know how it even got onto Instagram, but I'm glad it did. That's good. What about you, Injee?
I think I started off because it was just kind of like something to maybe improve to continue like studying Korean. But I think I got more interested in the literary aspect and I found it very fun once I actually had done it. So, yeah, I wanted to continue developing and practicing my skills through the workshop.
Yeah, well, that segues very nicely into what that experience has actually been like for you guys. So, I mean, I think, some of you have done the workshop multiple times, but a lot of you mentioned wanting to do the workshop as a way of attempting translation or just trying it out for the first time. And so, what has that process been like for you guys? How has it been to actually translate? Does anybody, maybe Injee, do you want to go first this time? Change it up a bit.
Yeah, so I think the first times, it was really difficult and slow because it's like you need to translate like every single meaning and word into English. But I found that actually doing the translations and getting feedback is the most helpful. So yeah, it's really like building like small pieces. Yeah.
Do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with Injee, and also I think like in advanced Korean, like you do a little bit of sort of short translation at some point in the classes, but even that took a lot of time and was quite slow and detailed and translating every single word. But then like Injee's right, like when you practice and have a reason to keep doing it over and over, it gets faster. You don't need to rely as much on sort of a heavy dictionary reference or like have a desperate papa go up and kind of compare every line, like which one, like which one's did it better, which I was doing in class at some point. I remember. But no, it's been really good to sort of, I think practice, like you need practice to get better at it, which has been said by I think everyone, and the workshop's been a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with the other two speakers. Yeah, it's like it's definitely tricky, not a skill that I feel many people can come naturally to like off the bat, but like the more you practice and the more feedback you get from people who are skilled at it, it makes it easier and you can get better at sort of doing it faster. And it's still tricky. I'm still not good, but I'm better, so that's the point really.
Kind of like everything that's been covered already, but it is hard at first. I think also having it as a group format kind of helps. Like it feels like you're doing it together with everyone, and it helps to just be able to like discuss like anything we've had trouble with like amongst our peers as well, and like with the tutors as well. So yeah, I think that helped as well.
Yeah, okay. So I guess in terms of actually looking at your translations from comparing from when you had to do things as part of your like advanced Korean class, or you tried to do things yourself, to now having done a workshop or multiple workshops, have you seen your skills improve? Do you see like a noticeable difference? Anyone, feel free to.
I basically mentioned it already, but like there definitely was one. I think, like I said, in the classes a few years ago, it was much slower and not as sort of nice sounding, I guess, whereas over the past 2 years, definitely, I think I've firstly sped up and also gotten sort of better at kind of linking, like being able to like, write nicely to actually translating properly. It's actually harder than you think to kind of make a nice bridge between that. And it's, having the sort of group format and having workshops to work towards means you actually also are motivated to like at least do it, whereas my attempts personally have not been great.
Well, I think like Injee, you mentioned that you've been here since the very first workshop in 2023, so this year would have been your third, and so I guess I'm especially curious to hear from you what like any noticeable differences have been in terms of your translation.
Well, first off, I think I had like a similar experience to Destiny, so I've gotten faster at translating sections of text, and now I focus more on the readability and quality of my writing, whereas the first time I was just focused on translating each word. And I noticed that when I look back at the documents, I left like gaps everywhere. So if I didn't know if this is too hard, then I would just there would be like blank spaces in between everywhere. Whereas now I think I just get down the first draft, like get it down and then edit it later.
That is I would say like a really cool improvement. Just being able to, I guess, get past obstacles as well. Praju, since you mentioned like doing group work or like the experience of like learning from the workshop, like how have those things been helpful for you?
Yeah, I guess getting to see like everyone's different perspectives on things is really helpful. Obviously, even if, you know, like things have the same, like we're always going to approach it a different way. And so when I feel like stuck on like a sentence or word, I think it's interesting to hear from other people how they would approach it. And that makes it, I feel like, a bit easier to, like get to an end result.
Yeah. And so has there been anything like through the process of learning translation that you've been surprised to discover? Like it could be either about the translation process itself, about your own skills, about anything really. Do you want to go?
I've got one to say, John. It's not really surprising, but like there was, I guess what I said before about kind of the connection between like natural, like translating and then writing it nicely. It's very easy to kind of stick with your first draft attempt of translation, which is very literal and trying to hit everything, and like sort of not taking the time to go back over and naturalize it, because making it sound natural to like in a native-ish way, there's like a line between kind of making it too, I guess, like in your own words and not like keeping enough of the author's words, which is really hard to hit. But also, like early on, and even like starting out in the workshops, I have to remember to like look back at it and not be lazy and kind of try and make it nicer. It's very easy to do that. But that's,
Did you have something?
Kind of like just the translation thing that I found interesting is like going to the workshops and like learning theories from Adams and Singing. And I felt like once I was reading like other translated books, I was able to sort of pick up on like techniques that the translator might be using. Like as an example, I was reading the Vegetarian by Aditi, and I noticed that in it like there's an extra sentence explaining what like a food dish means. And I remembered us talking about that in class, and I was like, oh, that's something someone's used like in the actual translation. Like it was cool to pick up on.
No, that's very cool. Yes, and that's always really exciting when you're able to see something that you learned in class use outside of class. And I wonder now if you guys also have that experience that I have sometimes, where I read a book and I'm like, I don't like this translation. And like it's when you read a translation, it's always difficult to be like, is this the writer or is this the translator? Like who is making this not nice? I don't know. But I guess, do you guys now, when you look at it, can be like translated books, but I think this can then cross over to also like if you're watching like a show and it has subtitles, like do you guys have that experience? Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I feel like I noticed it specifically with like shows and movies, because you have the source text and the translations there at the same time. Yeah. So I can like read a translation and hear what the actual person said, and I'm like, why did you translate it like that? I didn't like that. But it's also like people will interpret things slightly differently. People will have their own style. So it's not like I didn't like it means it's bad. It just means I would have done it differently maybe. But yeah, it's definitely a fun thing to pick up on, I think.
Yeah, and that's, that is a good thing to keep in mind as well. I don't know, Injee, if you had anything to add?
Yeah, I think I realized that translation isn't just like transferring the source text like exactly into another language. It's actually creating something new. So every person translates differently, so you'll get a different translation each time. So I think, I realized that it's not just like mechanically like having like an equal thing. It's like a creative process.
I just wanted to jump on Injee and ask you as well, because you were translating at the start of like doing Trunk and then becoming our editor. Yes. So like, I guess like, what's your opinion kind of like translating it, making it sound natural, but also like I guess reading over people's like submitted draft text. Like, have you found it?
Yes. So. Yes, I think that it is obviously, I think the one thing that is surprising to learn, and that maybe a lot of people who don't, if you've never tried it, something that you might not realize is that translation is very subjective. It's an extremely, extremely subjective thing to do. It's not really it's not like, so I think some people sometimes can think of it as like, okay, this is what you say in this language and this is the equivalent in this other language, and so you can just go line by line and do that. But that's really not the case, and I think that's especially not the case if you're translating like something like a book, which is a creative work. And so I think people focus on different things, and people have different strategies for how they want to translate. I think for me, readability is a very big thing, and I think that is something that you struggle a lot with at the beginning. And so that's, of course, when I'm translating, it's something I notice. And when I'm like looking at like participants' work, that also something that really stands out is that you are kind of going line by line, and you're not thinking of how does this work as a whole paragraph, or how does this even work as, what is this telling you about the story? What is the information you're telling us about the character? Like, those are all things that you have to be thinking about, but that is tricky to think about. In terms of making things sound natural, I mean, I think that is kind of an intuitive sense. And so this is why sometimes during the workshop, when I read people's translation, or when I read my own sometimes, but when I read other people's work, sometimes I also just want to be like, just go read some books. Just go read some books and look at what books are like, and then see if the way that you're writing kind of aligns with that. Does it look like it is? Does it read like it's a book? Does it read like it's good writing? And good writing, of course, is, it's not one thing. But I think a lot of skills that you maybe learn or that you're kind of taught if you do creative writing, those are very applicable to literary translation as well. Yeah. So thank you for the question. But in terms of a lot of, all of us, like, we're all people who have learned Korean. And so a lot of you mentioned developing an interest for translation from maybe your process of learning Korean as well. But obviously they are two different things. Learning a language and like translating from a language is a big step to take. And so what has that process been like for you, from like learning Korean or in, I guess in Injee's case, from like being a Korean speaker to then translating? What's that been like? Anybody feel free to step in. Yeah. Do you want to, since you're next to me?
This is a bad choice. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's kind of sort of not a natural, or not, I mean, anyone can try and translate, but like it does take practice to make it sound like a good translation or like a nice translation. And I think when you can speak another language up to even it's like a conversational level or higher, you can kind of sort of, I guess, understand things, intuit things for yourself in your mind kind of easily. Like you can translate it sort of for yourself, but it's very hard to like define that into something nice and concise and then put it onto words for other people, which is where that gap between the translation, the literal translation and the more readability thing probably happens a lot for a lot of the participants. And even for like myself studying out in the beginning weeks, you have to like flick that switch to kind of try and make it sound nice. But yeah, I think just because even when you're like learning like Korean, there's a reason that we are made to asked to do it as part of the classwork as well in advanced Korean, and doing it in that structure is quite like a nice sort of not too intimidating format. But I think just like it's still approachable, like it's still doable. You just have to change the way you look at the language, like the words maybe. And I don't know what I was saying. Someone else say something.
I feel like if I sort of think back to when I was like a beginner, translating it then is really easy, right? Because everything that you know how to say is really simple and kind of can map much more easily one-to-one. And then the better you get, the harder translation becomes. And you kind of don't need to translate in your head anymore because you just kind of understand anyway. And so then learning to translate again is like, you have to do it again. You have to learn again. And it's harder now because it's not just 밥을 먹었어 sort of thing. So like, it's like a new and this time more difficult skill. But yeah.
Like kind of along the same lines as what we've been saying. I also think like having like more conversational speaking skills, it doesn't always compare well to translation, where like the vocabulary you'd encounter in like a day-to-day conversation is just so different to something in like a literary text. So it takes a little bit also to, I guess, just get comfortable with like new words and stuff that you're going to encounter without knowing. Yeah.
And that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, because I think for everybody, you obviously have a good level of Korean, but I think you might have slightly different experience as well. So I think you mentioned that you're at like a conversational level. With you've both kind of you've done advanced Korean at uni, but I guess in terms of like, did you like read a lot of Korean books, say, or like interact a lot with Korean literature before this workshop?
Yeah. No. I've definitely sort of tried to read Korean books before. The issue is like I'm a fast reader in English, whereas in Korean, I'm not at that point where I can read as fast in a foreign language, which I guess is the same, for any non-native reader. Like it's always harder to read in a non-native language. So I've definitely made slow attempts and kind of read one or two things, but not much. And I have all my poetry books and non-fiction books that are like waiting for me on the shelf. But I think I did. Aside from that, I had read like some translated works of Korean and other languages, and of course outside of literature, like I've been exposed to various forms of other media. But it is very different having to translate it yourself, and even try and read a book in Korean and then translate a book in Korean is completely different experience as well. It's twice as slow.
Yeah, I feel like I always like try to read books in Korean, but then because I have to sit there and annotate it and I have to look up the words I don't know, and I just lose motivation very quickly, which was one thing about the workshop that's been really good, because you have like a deadline and you're doing it with everyone else, so it's it kind of makes me just sit down and suck it up and do the difficult task.
Injee, could you add as well?
Yeah, so I don't really read as much as I should, but I definitely enjoyed reading in Korean from before the workshops. But when I started translating, you have to really read deeply. So like, whereas you can, if you're just reading for enjoyment, you can just kind of like glaze over some parts. But when you're translating, I found that you have to like analyze each part because you need to capture the meaning as exactly as you can. So yeah, I think my scope of Korean in that way has expanded.
Yeah, that's really, yes, I think of course reading books really expands your knowledge of a language, and then of course when you have to translate it, that's a whole other task as well. So I guess in that process, have there been points where you felt like your ability to translate, say, was maybe hindered in some way by like your understanding of the text, or you had to spend a lot more time kind of trying to work out what was happening in the book, and then how did you kind of resolve that, I guess?
I feel like there were probably a couple of times where like there'd be this sort of like whole passage and I'd like understand almost all of it, and then there'd be this one word and I don't know the word and I look it up and it doesn't give me anything that makes sense, and I'm just sitting there racking my brains because it's like I need that last piece of glue to like put the whole thing together, and I'm like I literally don't know what's going on right now because of this one pesky word. So that's definitely like probably a hindrance I come across a couple of times.
How did you solve that then? Did you ask somebody, or did you bring it up in the session?
I asked someone, and I remember there was one time where I just had to like leave the word in Korean and then bring it up in the thing. But yeah.
Yeah, that's so tricky though. But then because then if that's like kind of the key to understanding the whole kind of plot point, that does make it difficult. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else?
Yeah.
I think not just one word, but sort of sometimes there's like idioms where if you're not familiar with them, it's very easy to kind of not click that that's an idiom sometimes in the text. And also like Saturday, I was reading a different book that had like a little jejuo in it, and it was hard. So I think for both of those, I ended up like going to a lot of like Naver blogs and like searching in Korean, like finding people's own kind of like analyses or being like, what is like the meaning of this in English, and finding their like in Korean text of how to translate this to English and trying to like approach it from the reverse. And then for Saturday, actually people have a lot of like vocab lists that kind of very helpfully match them into like regular Korean. So that was actually been nice that native resources actually are helpful sometimes as well.
That actually reminded me of something else. I find when I'm reading in Korean, because it's not my native language, I take everything at face value. And so I read very literally, and sometimes that can lead to getting confused.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yes, because sometimes, like you said, some things are idioms, and you're like, oh, this author thought of this beautiful phrase. And no, it turns out it's just like a commonly said thing. Like it's just a well-known idiom or proverb that people use. Satsuri is a really good example in the talk that it's basically like regional varieties or dialects in Korean that even for like, say, if a Korean reader was reading the book, that might be something that they might not fully understand, right? Because it's supposed to be these specific regional dialect. And I think the talk that we had by the translator Paige Morris on Monday, she translated a work called We Do Not Pact by Hangang, which is set in the island of Jeju, and that has a lot of the Jeju Island specific language. And I think she mentioned having to do a lot of research to try and first understand that and then be able to translate that. So that's definitely an interesting challenge. But so I guess coming to in general, the kind of challenges or just the idea of literary translation itself, I guess I'm curious as to what made you interested, not just in translation, but in translating books, in translating literature, because there's so much out there that you can do in terms of interpreting, for example, or translating documents, more technical translation. Those are often sometimes more concrete career paths, I guess, as well, and so people tend to be interested in them. But I guess what brought you to literary translation specifically?
Yeah, I feel like for me, two things. One, the access to the workshop, like it was about literary translation, so that's what I'll do. But also, when I did an interpreting course on exchange last year, one thing that I was often feeling is that like for translation, you can go over it again and again, but interpreting, like sometimes you get what the person's like script or whatever in advance, and sometimes it's completely off the cuff. And obviously, like my course was just an introduction course. We didn't have to do a whole speech or anything. It wasn't anything crazy, but like it is still much more off the cuff. Whereas like translation, you get to think about it. You get to sort of look at other like sources and materials to help you and stuff like that. So that, I suppose, gives a bit of like comfort, a little bit less stressful. Yeah.
No, that's so true. I feel like to do interpreting, you need to kind of have like a whole different brain. I feel like it looks very hard. But yes, any other thoughts about literary translation from you guys? Yep.
So literary translation specifically, adding on to agreeing with everything else there. I think I enjoy reading a lot, and also like non-English like book market is so like vast, and a lot of things aren't translated into English. So it is nice to at least be able to, whether or not it's a viable career path, knowing like how saturated the industry is or not, but just be able to do that for yourself and knowing you can do it is like really a nice feeling. But yeah, the workshop is very accessible and nice as well. But I think other options. Like you mentioned, the technical translation, that's feels like a lot more like serious in my head. I guess that's pretty bad, but like literary translation, like because we mentioned like the creative writing skills are part of it, and like I do enjoy kind of like writing as like a hobby sometimes, just for fun. So it is kind of sort of a fun way to sort of like balance translating the voice of the author while still having to write like something nice in English. So it's been just like a more sort of wholesome way to explore it, whereas interpreting is like really scary and hard. And technical documents, I don't want to have to learn like engineering vocab or something in Korean, like, and have to get things really precise. So like books are nice.
No, very valid. You say serious, you can say boring. I know what you mean. No offense to anybody who does that kind of translation, but I think, yes, translating books is maybe a bit more fun. Yeah. Praju, did you have anything to add?
Yep, like along that same lines, obviously, it's a lot more interesting to work on books. I love reading, obviously, a lot in my spare time. I also think, like, translating literary work, you can get kind of more, like, I don't know, stuck in the, like, you know, trying to think about, like, the metaphor and, like, what they mean and what's this symbolize, and, like, it's a lot more fun than opposed to maybe, like, more a technical thing where you're going sort of, like, a very, like, factual sort of, you have to think more about, like, what is the author's intention and, like, all that kind of stuff. It's a lot more interesting too. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it more difficult, but I do agree that it's a lot more interesting. I'd love to hear from you as well, Injee, especially because I think I've heard you mention that maybe, I mean, you've obviously done the translation workshop multiple times, and you're maybe even considering doing literary translation as work or as a career. So I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I think I was drawn to how literary translation is a very creative process. And I think I actually just like having to read the source text because I enjoy Korean literature, but when you read it as part of translation, you can really get deep into it. And I think I like having to reflect on the text. So I really enjoyed doing the book clubs as well because you get to discuss all the themes and the meanings of the book.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing up the book club. Yes, that is that's a good thing as well that I was kind of curious to hear from people about, because as I mentioned, we do sometimes do a book club before the workshop where we just discuss the book like it's a book club. But we'll maybe break it down and we'll do like a chapter and discuss that chapter, or maybe we'll discuss different themes per week or something like that, just to have like really detailed discussion. So how's the book club been like? Has that been interesting? Have you gotten anything from it?
Yeah, I think it's important to have read a book before you start trying to translate.
Very true. Yes, important.
It would be a little bit crazy to just open to page one and be like, let's go. So yeah, definitely good to have a sort of further understanding. And also because like most of us wouldn't consider ourselves fluent, or in my case anywhere near it, it's helpful to go through the book, have someone like explain maybe a part that we didn't quite get the full symbolism of or whatever like that. So yeah, it was definitely very, very necessary, I would say.
Anyone have anything to? Yes, I think that was kind of the aim of the book club as well. And you mentioned that, it'd be crazy to open a book and start translating. Well, the first year that we did it in 2023, that wasn't the intention, but I think what happened was that, obviously we gave people the book in advance, and we said that, we'll start the workshop on this date. So before then, read it and come. And, lots of people read it, and then some people didn't. And I do think that it was maybe trickier for them to translate when they hadn't read the book. So in some ways, the book club was also just our way of making people read the book, like making sure everyone had done that before we started on the translate. Because one thing is this general sense of, you should have an idea of what the writing is like or what the book is about before you start. But it, like, in very real terms, I think it makes a difference in your translation when you're like, say, translating one part of the book, but it's making reference to, say, like a plot point that happened like 3 chapters ago, or that's going to happen 3 chapters later. Like, everything in a book is obviously connected, so you want to know that when you're translating. Having now spent some time doing translation, have there been any points where you felt proud of yourself as translators?
I guess in general, obviously, it is very satisfying to have the sort of weekly input all there, and seeing the finished kind of drafts that you do in the workshop itself. That's nice. And also, I guess, like, outside of it, I feel a bit more like confident, like doing sort of like small, just like translating things. Like, I helped some people like translate some paragraphs before, just like for like little like letters or messages kind of thing, which is, hey, I used some like translation techniques from like week 3 that Adam mentioned once. That's kind of cool. It's not like the same like level or seriousness as like literary translation, but like just, I guess, I think having experience doing it in one area with books makes you just feel more confident in doing it elsewhere and applying what you know even in less formal context. So yeah.
No, that's really true. And like, it's like you said, even if you're using it in a different context, it's kind of like any other skill. Like once you develop it, you can kind of use it that way. It's like when you kind of like, I don't know, exercise and work out, you build like a muscle, you can kind of use that. So that's useful. But yes, what about you guys?
For me, I would say, because I'm still doing advanced Korean at ANU at the moment, so the workshop started before this semester started, so like I kind of got some practice at translating, and then went to class, and we had translation tasks every week, and I actually found it like easier than I was finding it at the beginning of the workshop. And I also feel like one thing when I initially started translating, and I mean I still do it but less so now, is struggling with not just putting everything word for word, because that's sort of the easiest way to do it. And like having done the workshop for a bit, I kind of, when doing the exercises in class or like for class, I like had the sort of confidence, I suppose, to just write it how it would sound good, rather than to like try and prove to someone that I understand every single word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's such a valid point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have so many thoughts about like, these ideas of, but like what is supposed to be an accurate translation or a literal translation or whatever. But so feel free to ask me later. But for now, so that's really interesting. So that you found it really useful in your class. And so do you notice a difference between, say, you and like your other classmates in doing these tasks? Are you just like better than everybody?
I'm definitely not better than everyone, but I'm also not really comparing myself to everyone either. But also these are tasks that we do in our own time.
Ah, okay.
So it's not a competition.
Well, I'm sure you're the best anyway. Yeah. And did you want to?
I think, like getting to do the tasks weekly was actually pretty helpful. And then maybe like going back when we did the parts where we were sort of reading through other translations, like going back to something I'd written and going like, oh, like that actually doesn't make any sense. Hang on, like I think I know how to make that. Like that one would make more sense another way. Like seeing that kind of even like a little progress in like a sentence that I think I know how to word better now is still really like rewarding to see. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And Injee, what about you?
I think the most satisfied I felt was when we completed a full novel with the trunk, and when it got published, which was like, I didn't expect that to happen. And also when we get to meet the authors of the original text. So last year we got to meet the author, and it was really cool to talk to them directly about their writing, which was quite inspiring, and it allows some insight into the field of literature. Yeah, and I think it's just cool to meet the author, like, yeah.
Yeah, well, that is a good point about being able to meet the author. Like I may have mentioned before, it's not necessarily common. Like translators don't always, are in contact with the author of the books they're translating. So I think it is very interesting to actually be able to talk to the author. So, I mean, Injee, can you tell us a little bit more? So what do you think you were able to gain from being able to talk to the author?
When we met the author, we had like a bunch of questions about the book, and so whereas before, like we would just assume, we just had to like assume, what did the author mean by this? Why did she include this character? And what was the meaning of these things? And we got to ask the author about these things, and yeah, it's also just like nice, I guess, to see like the actual person who wrote the book. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is very true. I think it is also kind of, based on my impression at least, I get the sense that it's also very nice for the author to meet the people who are like kind of working on translating their book. It's kind of flattering in some sense to have that. So it is a very nice kind of mutual exchange that happens when we're able to do that. But so just as a wrapping up question, I guess I'd like to ask you guys what you think, whether you think you'll kind of continue working on translation in the future, and what you'd like to see from yourself, I guess, as you continue to do that.
The other way. I think Yes, I don't know if I would do it as a career path per se. Like, you know, things could fall into place in 10 years and be like, oh wow, I can do a translation as a job. That's amazing. But in the meantime, to me, it's like a sort of hobby thing. Even through the workshop, if it keeps happening in the future, I would be very interested in taking part again, because the past 2 years have been great, and seeing kind of how the format evolves as well. This is all workshop specific, like see how it's changed over the at least the 2 years I've been in has been really cool, and I'm always learning like new things or reinforcing things I've learned. And I would hopefully, as it keeps going on, if I continue to somehow balance work-life balance and hobbies, I would like to like continue or reattempt my translations of my own kind of books, or at least read them finally. So it'd be nice if next year, if the workshop happens again and I take part, I would like to hopefully go into it having progressed in a book that I own. That's my goal.
That's a very good goal. Yeah.
I would definitely like to continue doing the workshops. Hopefully they continue. I think, it's a very good way to sort of give you that sort of structure to do the thing you want to do. But like if I'm just translating on my own, it's like there's no structure, there's sort of not a lot holding me to it. I also really want to have a go at like subtitle translating and stuff like that. That's a personal goal of mine. I haven't really tried yet because it's kind of intimidating, but I like to think that the more I translate in like the workshops and stuff, the more I'll feel that I just give it a go, you know.
Like along similar lines, I would definitely like to keep like trying to do more translation. Obviously, if the workshop continues, I would love to do that again. I also kind of like Destiny, I also have a bunch of books at home that I need to read. So ideally, just getting more comfortable with just like reading novels more so, like in my spare time, would be really good as well. Yeah.
And Injee, you too?
I would love to become a translator professionally, so I'm looking for opportunities, and I think I need to become more familiar with just reading and writing in English, because that's like if you don't read in English, it's kind of impossible to write well. So yeah, I'm working on that.
Very, very good goal. Yes, always read more books. But yes, thank you guys for all of your very thoughtful answers. And thank you guys for listening. And we'll now open it up to any questions that anybody has. Feel free to raise your hand and just ask. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Was the actual part I speak into? This bit? Okay. I'm graduating this semester. I'm in the same class as Grace. Next year when you run the workshop, am I able to still participate?
Yes. I don't have to say it into a mic or not. But, yes. So the workshops, they are very open. Essentially, anybody can really join them. And so, of course, we have students who join, but we also have people like Destiny, who graduated several years ago and has a full-time APS job now, but she still manages to come. And we also, Injee is in Sydney. We've had people in the past who are in other parts of the country or even outside the country. So there's really no barriers to entry at all. So if you're interested, you can join. Yes. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the discussion. I really enjoyed learning from your own experience. You guys all said that translating literary works is fun, and it's nice, and it's relatively easy, or like the translating the real stuff is challenging and scary. But I thought that in the other way, because non-literary text, it's more like a content to content, and then as a translator, you're working like kind of behind, and then you want to focus on get the meaning across, right? Like correctly, right? But literary is it's more like creative work, right? Like one of you said, right? So you are, as a translator, as an independent artist too, right? Of course, you have your source text rather than original, right? Yeah. But my question is that, but still, I think we all work within the time framework, right? We have deadlines. So I've done like not literary translation. I've done like technical translations, which was easier for me. And then I've learned a few quick dirty tips or skills I learned. One thing that I learned is that, rather than try to focus on gory details, it's better to, like Grace said, that it's better to have your sentence translated like sound nice, right? And then go back to your sentence as after you're done with your first draft, right? And then go back and then translate again and then find more details, right? Yeah. So that was one thing, like, no, don't pay attention to sentence, right? Get the dirty job first and then go back and then, refine, like putting on makeup, and the more time you spend and it gets prettier, right? So that's one thing that I learned. And the other thing I learned, I think I forgot. So my question is that, did you, like, throughout this couple of years or first year experience, what are the skills that you think you gained as a translator out of your own experience? Because everybody started from different stages. So I think what you gained, your skills must be different, right? So would you like to share some of your experience?
Who wants to go? Having a think? Yeah. Yeah.
Start off the top of my head. I guess sort of, I think over the 2 years that I've done it, I've definitely become sort of more practiced and faster at it. I think when I do the literary translation, I've found that I kind of I do focus more on the detail first of the sentences, and then I kind of make it sound nicer from there. But I think that helps for me more because when I read books normally in English, and also I guess in Korean when I find the time, I do sort of glaze over things a bit because I do kind of read it fast and sort of don't focus on every detail. So when I translate the books, I do need to kind of, I think Injee mentioned this before, but you need to analyze the detail and remember you don't want to like drop off some adjectives that will like add to the sort of the feel, the mood of the scene of an action. So I do actually find, at least for me, I need to do the granular detail and then kind of pull out and maybe refine it to something that's a bit more nicer sounding English, but maybe it loses 1 or 2 words, just for me, because otherwise I would be maybe going too broadly and not remembering to go deep enough, because it sounds nice already, I don't have to go back to that sentence, but actually I'm skipping over a clause or something that like should probably go in there. But that's all I have. I don't know, what's my full time?
I think for me, something that I've gotten better at is like seeing the bigger picture, and I definitely don't think I'm doing that well every time, but compared to when I started, I'm definitely better at like seeing the bigger picture and getting down, say, like the paragraph or the sort of passage rather than this word. So I think that's a skill that I'm still honing, but have begun to hone.
Kind of like similar actually for me. Like I feel like when I started, I was doing very much like word for word, like, and this means this and this means this and then making it a sentence, and that was always just really, it read so weird in English. But like trying to get better at like seeing it as a sentence and then just turning that into English as a whole rather than as like little bits is
Injee, did you have anything?
I think one skill I've gained is finding the balance between keeping the original meaning of the text as much as possible, but also making something so that it's readable. And also I think there's a lot of like conflict that goes on because a lot of things are not equivalent and can't be translated. So like certain terms, and I think as you go on, at first it's like, well, what do I do? Like you just want to leave it like as the original, but I think with more experience you kind of get like ideas of how do I, like, ways to deal with things like that and make decisions.
Yeah, I think these are all things that I think everybody kind of goes through as part of translation. I think for me, to get a bit more philosophical, I guess, because I think you do go through certain like changes in your mindset or how you even think about translation as you keep doing it. And I think for me, some of the biggest things have been to kind of like developments in the way that I even think about what the purpose of a translation is, or like what I'm trying to achieve with this translation. I think I used to have certain ideas about, I want, like, if a Korean reader read this book and an Anglophone reader read this book, I want them to have the same experience. But then at a certain point, you reach the conclusion that, well, they're just inherently two different readers. But that's not a bad thing, right? And so I think that you have those changes in mindset. I think the other thing that for me has been very helpful is being able to kind of rethink how you do translation. So you're not thinking about just like a word or even a sentence. You're thinking about, what is the information that I'm getting from this? So it's like, maybe it's these like meanings in terms of like, actually, a series of events happened, or like a character said something, but then thinking about, okay, what is so it's that actual meaning, it's maybe the tone in which they said it, it's the thing that it's telling us about that character. And so being able to kind of take all of that and then kind of recreate that in English. So I'm not going, here is a sentence, here is how I can translate these words into English. It's like, okay, I read this sentence, or I read these couple of sentences. This is how I would say it in English, or this is how I would write it in English, so that somebody reading in English would maybe get a similar meaning and emotion from it. But yeah, I think similar to what everybody else said. Yeah.
You're saying the literary translation is not just a literary translation. It's like putting words in different creation.
Well, essentially, yes. You are like recreating this work in a different language. That's essentially what you're doing. Yeah.
Hello. As somebody who knows nothing about Korean, I'm just curious, like, is it possible for one of you to give us an actual demo of what you just spoke about?
Oh, an actual demo. No, that's okay. Let's see, an actual demo. We'd have to go with like a simple sentence maybe, but I guess one, I guess, common place where you have to do that is with dialogue, I think, which in a story, dialogue is very important. But the way it works in Korean is like, one, there aren't, in English, usually when you see dialogue, for example, you have like, she said, and there's like quotation marks, and that's how you kind of know it's dialogue. Whereas in Korean, it's just kind of embedded into the sentence. There aren't really tags. It's in the grammar that's telling you that this is something that somebody said, but it's not really kind of marked out that way necessarily. And often it can be confusing at first read, who is even saying this? Like, you might not intuitively get that. It might not be explicitly stated. So having to kind of so a lot of times I think when you have to recreate that into English, you have to kind of just pull it apart. So you'll have like a big paragraph in Korean, which is all of the dialogue. And in English, what you'll have is a series of actual what looks like dialogue in English, and I'll have added markers like, she said this. And I'll also, in the Korean, what you will again just have as part of the sentence is like actual descriptions of like, okay, somebody was laughing or they were angry or whatever. But in English, you'll do the thing that you do in dialogue, which is like, she said angrily, or she said while like hitting him. I don't know why these are all violent examples, but you get what I mean. So it'll look completely different in English, but it's kind of conveying the same thing. Yeah.
I guess, like, also on that, I remember there were a few weeks where we did actually have, I think it was one of the points raised in the workshop was like, oh, so who actually said this dialogue? So people translated, I think, in one way, but it was actually meant to be like the other person. Yeah. But it wasn't really clear, or like people were a bit confused because just the way the conversation went, it wasn't 100% combined with like the dialogue tags not being clearly marked. So it is something you have to practice out a lot.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions?
Just to follow.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm teaching intermediate Korean this semester, and then Adam just mentioned in his presentation the syntactic differences, right? So I can think of one example from my own students actually. Also, we just learn how to describe our appearance, right? And in English, you'll say that I have long hair, right? And that most of my students, they describe that way, right? As like they would translate from English to Korean. But if you think about it in Korean, then it's not really natural, right? Because in Korea, literally you will say that my hair is long.
Yeah.
머리가 길어요. My hair is long. Yeah, but in English, you will definitely translate into I have long hair, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the examples. The other example that I find very hard to explain the difference is that I like it. Because in Korea, like, 선생님, you have nice hair today, you have nice clothes today, 좋아해요. And I don't know how to correct that. Would you have any suggestions for that?
Well, yeah, I guess more naturally in Korean you would say something like 예뻐요, or like it looks nice, or like 잘 어울려요, like it suits you, not just like I like it. Yeah. But the descriptions are very tricky because in Korean as well, you tend to, Adam mentioned the relative clauses, you tend to, like, for example, if you're describing somebody, they might say, like, 캔버라에서 사는 Destiny. So like Destiny who lives in Canberra. That is how you might describe. Whereas in English, it's a lot more natural to say Destiny lives in Canberra. You don't want to have those constant relative. But in Korean, most sentences are like this person who does this and who went there and who, but that's very confusing to read in English. So you constantly have to cut that up. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else have any closing remarks, any final points to add? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. As you mentioned before, there's sometimes really long sentences in Korean. I've experienced some in advanced Korean with Grace. And like, is that just a skill you learn on how to naturally place full stops and like rejig the sentences? And is that also just like a really common feature of Korean literature where there's like really, really long flowing sentences because their grammar is very different to English?
Yes, I'll pass it on to hear other people's thoughts as well. But yes, that is a common feature of Korean. That is just kind of how people tend to write things. And so, yeah, when you have to translate into English, you do have to rethink that. And so often, I think, as a first pass, you can maybe just do it in the structure that it is in the Korean. But I think you have to rethink it completely. So I think you again have to do the thing that I mentioned where you kind of take a step back and you're like, what is actually being said here? Like, what is the series of events? What is the information being given? And what is the most logical and natural way to do that in English? So like, if I were to give this information in English, how would I do that? And that's kind of the way I think you have to do it. I don't know if anybody has other thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I find hardest about super long sentences like that is when sort of like the end of it flows on really naturally to what the next sentence is, but you're sitting there struggling for ages trying to make the English end there as well, because you sort of have to break them up into at least two sentences, and then you can't sort of naturally make that flow happen. So I find that this is not, you were like, and does it become easy? Not yet. Personally, not yet. So that's not really a helpful answer, but yeah.
I think the way it becomes easy is that you kind of stop, you kind of break free from the idea of what you can or can't do. And so you're like, why can't I take this information that comes at the end of the passage in Korean and just put it at the beginning? Or I take these sentences and I make it into 5 different things. Or I take a sentence, I make it into dialogue. It's much clearer that way. Like you just kind of, you find out how it works best. And you're not trying to adhere to like a structure that exists in Korean. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. I think there's maybe some pastries outside still if you want. If not, yeah, hopefully see you at some of the other events. Thanks for coming. Thank you.